مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. لا يزال العام 2024 في بدايته، لكنه يبدو كأحد أهم وأغرب الأعوام السياسية في تاريخ أميركا. على المستوى الرئاسي تتصاعد الاحتمالات بأن المنافسة ستشهد إعادة لسباق انتخاباتنا الرئاسية السابقة مع أكبر مرشحين سنا، وقد أصبحا أكبر بأربع سنوات من السابق. وفي الوقت نفسه لا يزال أحدهما يخسر معركة كدائية تلو الأخرى، فهل سيدور ذلك بفرص وصوله إلى البيت الأبيض؟ وهل علينا أن ننتظر حتى نوفمبر لمعرفة ذلك؟ كما أن باقي مناحي السياسة الأميركية تبدو كذلك أغرب من المعتاد، فالديمقراطيون أكثر تشدداً بالنسبة للأمن على الحدود، بينما قد يصوت الجمهوريون ضد خططهم السابقة، وقد يعود الأغلاق الحكومي من جديد، بينما يتساءل خصوم الأمريكيين من موسكو إلى طهران: ما إذا كانت واشنطن تمتلك التصميم والوحدة المطلوبتين للدفاع عن أصدقائنا ومصالحنا ومبادئنا؟ كل هذا ونحن ما زلنا في بداية فبراير. لبحث السياسة الأمريكية في بداية هذه السنة السياسية غير الاعتيادية، يسرني أن أستضيف نخبة متميزة من الخبراء، وهم ديفيد هوكينز، أنا جيراتيلي، وباولو فان شيراك. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. There is lots of politics going on in America. First Iowa, then New Hampshire. The Trump train seems unstoppable, except when he goes to court, when he gets stopped all the time in some very expensive ways. But yet there's a lot more politics all over our country, especially down at the southern border. So we're going to talk about all these issues today. Delighted to welcome David Hawkins, Anna Giratelli, and Paolo Von Schirach. Thank you all for joining us this morning. So David, let me start with you. Is the Trump train unstoppable?
I think the Trump train is way beyond left the station, and unless something totally unpredictable happens, he will be only, I think, the third or fourth person to ever be a major party's nominee for president 3 consecutive times.
Quite remarkable. I think we have to go back to the 1950s before we had a rematch between presidential candidates of major parties. And then I think you have to go back to William Jennings Bryan, not a household name in American politics, for the last time we had a major ticket produce the same guy 3 times in a row.
Right. Well, FDR, Franklin Roosevelt did it.
Yes.
But you're right. There was a rematch between Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson in 1952 and 1956. But it's highly unusual. The Republicans have a history of not giving their candidates a second chance, let alone a third chance. So this is unusual. As I say every time I'm on with you, Donald Trump has defied every law of political gravity that there is.
So, Paolo, the national economy right now seems to be humming along reasonably well. Before we move to some other topics, can you just give us a little reminder of where the economy was in the 4 years that Donald Trump was president of the United States?
Well, the economy when Trump was president was doing also reasonably well. Of course, people remember the tax cuts, both the corporate tax cut, which was overdue. America had one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, at least among other advanced industrial countries, which put American corporates at a disadvantage, because when others are taxed, say, at 20% and you're taxed at 35 or more, well, obviously there is a disadvantage, and then also cause behavior on the part of major corporations, such as not repatriating profits and keeping them abroad, because again, otherwise they would pay a huge tax on them. And then the personal income tax cuts. Of course, what that did, sometimes people forget, was to blow the deficit of the national debt, which is not exactly a Republican thing to do, to be completely, how can I say, nonchalant regarding increases in the deficit and the debt. Again, let's remember that at the beginning of 2020, that is right before the COVID crisis, changed everything all over the world, including the United States. The U.S. was running a deficit of $1 trillion. This is an economy that was humming along, almost at full employment, and yet with an enormous and growing national debt. So for some reason, the memory of Americans is that, oh, those were the good old days when Trump was running, the economy was great. And now under Biden, things are really bad. Well, if you look at the numbers, they're not bad at all. But the perception of people, particularly having experienced very high inflation in the last couple of years until now, where things seem to be getting a little bit better, the perception is that for some reason, Trump knows how to run the economy, Biden does not. Go figure, because the numbers certainly don't substantiate this claim. But however, consumer sentiment seems to be going higher now. Some people attribute this to a lag effect. In other words, first come the good numbers, then come the good feelings with a few months delay.
Well, I'm sure that Joe Biden hopes that that lag effect kicks in sometime in the first week of November later this year. Listen, before we go to some of the conflict over the southern border, and I did want to ask our panelists. Paulo just referred to deficit.
So no, I don't think it'll amount to much. I think there is a big block of Republicans that are itching for some kind of shutdown, even for a short time. So yes, I'll predict that there'll be a short one.
And Paulo, any economic implications of a short government shutdown?
Look, more than the economic implications, what concerns me is that now the abnormality of the budget cycle has become normal. Regular order doesn't exist anymore. We do not begin the fiscal year, which starts on October 1st of every year, with a budget. No, I don't remember the last time that happened, with a budget where all the departments and all the functions of government are being funded. The abnormality, what used to be the exceptional circumstances due to whatever specific moments regarding one area of public spending, well, now it's the norm. We don't have a budget. We never do have it on time. We run on continuing resolutions. This is really a bad sign of dysfunction of the American government. Unfortunately, we've become so used to this that it seems normal, that now this is how Washington works, or rather, the fact that it doesn't work, it's okay. And we accept it, and maybe most Americans don't follow these things closely and don't particularly care. The Republicans get blamed for being obstructionists and difficult, and it doesn't accrue to any political gain to them to be obstructionists and to be difficult on these matters. Let's not forget the House. The House majority is 3 votes now? I mean, if I'm not mistaken. So in terms of the Republicans continuing to run it until the next election, I do not believe that would be an issue. My concern, again, is the complete abnormality of this way of doing business, which has now become the new normal in Washington.
All right, so you mentioned the word dysfunction. Anna, before we get into the politics of the border, could you tell us what is actually the situation at our southern border? Is it, as some say, a dysfunctional aspect of American national security and homeland security?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say it should not be operating at the level it's operating. So I've covered the border 6 years and been down to the border nationwide 60 times. So I've seen it in more stable states versus what it is now. Historically, we would see 30 to 50,000 people arrested at the southern border per month. Those are people who walk around the ports of entry. They may seek asylum, they may not, but they get arrested by Border Patrol. Under Biden, we've seen 150,000 to 250,000 per month. Last month, December, was 250,000 people arrested at the southern border, the highest number we've ever seen. And so the Biden administration doesn't want to detain people. They want to release people because holding them in custody is just not humane. And they're trying not to also deter people who are making their way here who might be seeking asylum. But the Border Patrol has just gotten more efficient at processing people, taking them into custody very quickly, releasing them onto the street, and people have to figure out where to go from there. But I certainly think this is it's a crisis we've learned to manage really well. And the Border Patrol agents tell me they're really concerned about the next few months, even after the election. It's typically where we see even higher surges of people looking to get in as administrations shift.
So I'm sorry, just to explain, maybe I'm missing some of the detail here. So 250,000 people show up at the border, decide to walk around the official border crossing because they wouldn't be let in at the official border crossing. They walk around, they get arrested, and then they're released on the American side of the border to do as they will until some future legal proceeding. Is that it?
Yeah, so the 250,000 last month, I mean, that's 250,000 people in 1 month came across the southern border. It's astonishing. But DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, he's moving closer and closer to being impeached by the House. He told Border Patrol agents in Eagle Pass, Texas last month that 85% of immigrants who are arrested are ending up getting released into the United States. So they're going to be placed into legal proceedings for removal, but they're not going to appear in court for sometimes 3, 4, up to 7 or 8 years down the road. And so the debate we have between Republicans and Democrats is, you know, can you hold people at the border? Can you surge asylum and judges and everybody down there, asylum officers, to hear those cases quickly, 30, 60 days, and then remove people who don't meet asylum standards? That's why you have people showing up in New York and Chicago and Denver and saying, hey, we don't have anything, but we have this paper that says we have to be in court in 2030. We don't know where to go. We can't get work. And that's why it's created such a disaster for these sanctuary cities far from the border.
And just one more question before I'm going to open this up to more political discussion. Why is it so tough just to not let people cross the border? I mean, I'm sure viewers who come from countries that have much more stringent border controls are asking that question. Why don't we just not let people cross the border?
Yeah, so there's a 2,000-mile southern border between the United States and Mexico, and less than half of it has a substantial barrier. So roughly half of it is something that you or I could physically walk across without having an issue. It might be a 4-foot fence, but we could get over it. Once someone has crossed the border, they are on U.S. soil, and Border Patrol is legally has to take them into custody. And the issue with the border wall that's gone up under Trump, under Obama, under Bush, is it's not on the actual border. The border, the river, is the actual border. The wall is often a couple hundred feet further into the United States. So once someone is across that river, they might not have come across the wall, but they're in the United States. Border Patrol does need to apprehend them. And that's what's pit Texas and the United States against one another, because Texas is saying, why don't we actually deter people from crossing? Why don't we physically stand there and not let them get past us? Where the feds are saying, well, we have to take them into custody because they're on the US side, even though they're going to end up getting released. That's sort of the issue here, where you can't actually shut down the border because there's so many open spaces where people can get through.
All right, well, thank you for giving us the baseline. When we come back after the break, we're going to talk about the politics of this, how it affects everything from the future government shutdown to American aid to Ukraine to possibly our presidential election in November. In just a moment. Again, my guests today include David Hawkins. David is senior editor of The American Leader a nonprofit taking on America's biggest systemic problems. He was also the founding editor of thefulcrum.com, and he spent 2 decades as senior editor at CQ and Roll Call, 2 must-read news sites covering Capitol Hill. Also with us is Anna Giratelli. Anna is the Immigration and Homeland Security reporter for the Washington Examiner, where she has reported extensively from America's southern border. Previously, she reported for CQ Roll Call, Yahoo News, and The Oregonian. And with us today is Paulo von Schirach. Paulo is president of the Global Policy Institute, a Washington-based think tank. His research focuses on contemporary world politics, economics, and international trade. Previously, he was affiliated with the London School of Economics and the University of Pisa. All right, David, we just heard from Anna about the actual situation on the border. This is the stuff of big politics here in Washington, an effort after many years to perhaps get a border deal, a legislative agreement that Republicans and Democrats might sign on to regulate reform along the border. What's the situation there?
Well, the situation as we're speaking is that the Republicans, negotiators from both parties, Republican and Democrat in the Senate, were quite close to a quite important deal. Neither side was saying that they got everything they want, which is the nature of negotiation. Neither side was saying that this would be the be-all and end-all of immigration policy, but both sides were saying that it could make a significant dent in the problem, in part by giving the president, Biden in this case, the power to declare sort of an emergency and shut the border down for a while. This all, in the abstract, in the non-political abstract, seemed like, wow, the legislative process was working. And then into the picture steps the former president and would-be future president Donald Trump, who made border security for years and years and years, and wants to make in the campaign this his main issue, and says, wait, I don't want a deal when I'm not the president. No deal. Republicans, walk away from the table, please. I would rather have this as a campaign issue than have it as a deal for which Democrats and particularly Joe Biden could take credit. And so Republicans, especially in the House of Representatives, have said, okay, we won't go for a deal. Whatever is agreed to in this compromise will be dead on arrival in the House. We won't vote on it because we want to give you, Mr. Former President and potentially future president, all the support we can in every way we can. So we'll just wait and have you fix the problem.
So in addition to this being a border security issue and a political issue, there are strategic implications because this is all connected, Paulo, to American assistance for Ukraine too. So how might this issue about what happens on the Rio Grande affect what happens between Russia and Ukraine?
Oddly enough, this can become an opportunity for President Biden because he was caught in this unpleasant situation of combining, as you pointed out, continuing military assistance to Ukraine and Israel in the aftermath of the October 7th massacres that Israel suffered, and then the consequent war it's ongoing, unfortunately, in Gaza, with border security. And of course, at the beginning, this is something that the White House didn't want at all. They wanted to keep the two issues separate, foreign military assistance and the border. Now, the opportunity for Biden is, hey, we got a deal. I'm signing it tomorrow. If you send it to me, I'm going to sign it and I'm going to close the border tomorrow, which is really an interesting shift in terms of policy focus, knowing, as he does, that Trump doesn't want it and the Republicans will oblige most likely Trump. So he can run Biden on saying, I wanted a deal. I wanted to shut down the border. They didn't let me because they didn't send me a bill that I could sign. That is maybe a political, advantage for Mr. Biden, but it does not solve, unfortunately, the issue of foreign military assistance to Ukraine, which is down to literally the last bullet. almost. They are running out of ammunition, the Ukrainians, that is. Whatever comes from Europe is, it's a trickle, not much at all. The big supplier is the US. And if the Congress does not pass the package for Ukraine, situation on the ground will deteriorate badly, and we end up allowing Putin to win by default, simply because the Ukrainians don't have bullets to fire. That would be a tremendous setback for the West, for Europe, for European security, for world security, because it would prove in the end that aggression pays, that if you stick to it, Mr. Putin, notwithstanding all his losses, he may actually win.
Anna, could it really be possible that after years of trying, the negotiators achieve a border deal and then Republicans reject their own plan, as Donald Trump wants them to do?
I think it's very feasible at this point. With what's going on right now, we're seeing so many different things. We're seeing the state versus federal fight between Texas and the DOJ. We're seeing
Department of Justice for our viewers, yes.
Yes. The Biden administration will sort of change some initiatives and implement some new policies, but nothing ever permanently goes down. And so, I think the supplemental fight is just another sort of wrench that's been thrown into the mix that's made it very difficult. There's so many moving pieces, and it's not clear there's going to be any real movement going forward. I think after 3 years of the border being in this state, more than 7 million people have come across and been encountered by federal law enforcement. It's kind of like, well, what's another few months until we get back the White House? The Republicans are thinking we'll just wait until something happens then.
And David, just assess the politics here. Joe Biden sounds more like Ted Cruz these days on the border. Donald Trump, it's difficult where how people are viewing his opposition to a border deal. Lay out the politics for us.
Well, right. So great points. Yes, probably for a general election, better for Joe Biden to sound like Ted Cruz, better for him to sound like the immigration hardliner for the next several months. He is perceived by the electorate. Polls show that he has been perceived as weak on immigration, and this is a top issue for voters. So if he looks like the hardliner, I think that's a political winner for him. Former President Trump, as I think viewers around the world know, immigration has been his #1 issue since he first ran in 2016. And on the one hand, you'd think, well, isn't he going to look like just a sort of typical politician that he rails against? If now that a deal was in reach, he wants to postpone a solution to this for his own narrow political purposes. On the one hand, yes, he will look a bit like a bit insincere and a bit like too political. But on the other hand, voters think this is endemic to both parties at all times. They say, oh, everybody's a typical politician. So it's sort of a neutral issue that this time Trump may be acting like a typical politician. Biden's acted like a typical politician. They all change their mind depending on what suits them. So it's sort of a non-issue, oddly.
Fascinating. All right. Well, we are on the cusp of these big decisions. Thank you all for helping lay them out for our viewers. I want to thank David Hawkins, Anna Giratelli, and Paolo Van Schirach. Thanks for joining us on Dakhel Washington. وإلى هنا نصل إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كانت لديكم تساؤلات أو تعليقات حول موضوع الحلقة وخاصة السياسة المتعلقة بحدودنا الجنوبية، أرجو التواصل معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ Inside Washington أو مراسلتي @RobSatloff. أراكم الأسبوع القادم وحتى ذلك الحين شكرا وإلى اللقاء.